It's Thursday and time for our weekly Art of Advocacy show. So, I have heard from a lot of parents that it's just that time of year where it seems like, my kids aren't feeling connected at school. They aren't talking about friends and setting up play dates or things that they can do with friends on the weekend. I notice that we just kind of sit at home and don't really get involved in community activities. So today we're going to be talking about 3 specific ways that we can help our kids become more connected at school, in our neighborhoods, and in our communities. Because to me, one of the greatest gifts that we can make sure our child has is that sense of belonging. So if this is a topic that is near and dear to your heart, welcome. I hope that you'll be participating, typing in questions and comments in the comment box. And because we are on Be Live TV, I can bring your comments up. I see we have a couple live people with us, so feel free to chime in. I wanted to start with a quotation that I love. Let me take down this and bring up this. So this is to get us started today. It says, love, belonging, and connection are the universal sources of well-being. Think about that. I love it. I love it. I love it. So let's get into some strategies that you can use about making sure your child feels love, that he has that sense of belonging, and they do feel that connection to other people around them, because that's like super important. And this actually, I feel like, goes with our December campaign of Scatter Kindness Now and Always. So if you haven't joined our kindness campaign or celebration, all you have to do is type in the word kindness in the comment box and we will get you signed up. Each day of the month, you'll receive 2 new ideas on an act of kindness that your child can do and an act of kindness that you can do. And one of the reasons I wanted to do that kindness campaign or celebration was to show people that our kids can be on the giving end. So many times our children are on the receiving end of help, and I don't think that people always understand the gifts and the things, the strengths and the skills that our kids can give unto others. So this month, I'm hoping that you'll encourage your child to do a random act of kindness each day. And like I said, if you type in the word kindness in the comment box, I can make sure you get signed up and you'll start receiving those. Now, one of the things that I wanted to talk about today with our strategies of having our kids get more connected, I first wanted to show you this, infographic or image, I guess. And you might have seen this. It's been around for a while. It's not something brand new. But what I like about it is, one, it uses circles, and to me, circles are important because they give us that connection. So I'm going to see if I do this, then I can still be here with you while I show you part of the image at least, right? So when I look at this, I also see kind of the evolution that I took in my teaching career. So you'll know that I'm very old because I started teaching back in the 70s, actually a year before we had any federal law about making sure that students with disabilities were allowed to go to public school. So when I started teaching, if you look at that circle in the lower corner where it says exclusion, you see a circle with a lot of green dots inside, and then outside that circle, different colored dots. And to me, that represents, yes, we had public schools and most students were inside the public school getting an education. However, back in the 70s and even, of course, before that, we had separate schools. And if you had a child with a disability, they were more than likely having to go to a totally separate school, not their neighborhood school, and they received some special ed supports. So they started their school career out being excluded. They were even excluded from the same public school building as others. So then as we evolved, and I'll have to take my picture down here so you can see these better, but as we evolved in education, then we had segregation. And so this was, I guess, one step closer to being the ideal part that we want. But with segregation, it's that circle in the bottom, in the middle. And we have still that circle of public education. And now what we did is we brought some students into the public schools, but they still were in a separate class pretty much all day. So that was when they were like in self-contained classrooms. And when I first started teaching, I was actually in I was hired as an aide in a totally separate school. And then a few months later, they wanted to take some of those students from the separate school and say, let's put them in an elementary building, but in a self-contained separate class. So that was our evolution to segregation. So our kids had a little bit of contact, a little bit of connection with typical age peers, but not very much. And then if you look at the next circle there on the bottom, now we're seeing some integration. And this is where we still see some schools kind of stuck, where our kids are in the public school. It still might not be their neighborhood school, but they do start spending some time in general ed classes. And sometimes when kids are only integrated instead of included, the time that they spend in general ed classes is for subjects like PE, music, recess, lunch, art. So not any of the core kinds of activities or subjects that are going on in a general ed classroom, but more of the so-called specials. And then at the top, you have a circle and it's labeled inclusion. And you see within that circle, within that public school, diversity, and that all students are supported there. And that's what we want to be seeing for all of our kids. Hey, Lissa, I see that Lissa's on with us. So nice to have you join us, Lissa. We're just talking about how to help our kids get more connected. And one of the ways that we can do that is to make sure that our kids are included in as much of the typical classroom, neighborhood, community environments as we can. And because we're dealing with students with a variety of unique needs, that's going to look differently for every child. So I don't want parents to feel like, that's my kid's not fully included. I must be doing something wrong and falling into the trap of, that mom guilt that we can all be experts at. So depending on what your child needs at that time and place is what you want for your child. And as much as possible, we want them to have those connections to others. Because as Judith Snow, a self-advocate who is no longer with us, but is a wonderful spirit, with us. Judith always said that the only disability is having no relationships. And that's what we want to change for our kids. As adults, we know how important friendships and connections with other people are, and we want to start that when our kids are young. So one of the things that we can do, one strategy, is to make sure that your child is included as much as possible with typical age peers, that they have the ability to experience not only the academic work at school, but if there's after school clubs, if there are intramural sports teams, things like that, that they can get involved with, that's excellent. And a lot of times those extracurricular activities are going to be things that can really tap into our kids' interests and their strengths. So we want them to have balance with that and be doing fun things at school and not spending all 7 hours having to work on things that they don't do well. Because as parents, I don't think any of us sign up for classes that we really don't do well in and are excited about it. So we want to bring that balance to our kids. So, Lissa, I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments. So feel free to jump in our conversation. So a second way that we can make sure that our kids are connected is to make sure that they understand that they have more in common with other students than they necessarily have differences. And this is something you've probably heard before, that we're more alike than different. But we really want our kids to have an understanding of that and not only celebrate their differences and understand that those are wonderful gifts, and we want them to be proud of who they are. We also want them to know that there's things that they have in common with other friends at school. And that when we find those commonalities, a lot of times that's where we can start nurturing those connections. So I was going to share with you just one idea that I used when I was a classroom teacher. So what I would do, and let me just show this by itself, is I actually would have the kids sit in front of the overhead projector. So now you can also see how old I am. We use overhead projectors and create that shadow. And I would draw an outline of their profile, and they would cut it out, and they would have this profile picture of themselves. So each of the students in my class, they would have this profile picture. They were paired up with another student in the classroom. And what they did, I kind of made this as a Venn diagram, which is hard to show here on camera. But what I did is I had each of the students write down in their silhouette things that they loved, things that they didn't like, things they were interested in, strengths that they had, even basic things like favorite foods or favorite Xbox games or TV shows. So they did that separately, but then we moved and we talked about what things do you have in common with your partner. So this image looks a little strange, but let's see if I can, pull up the right one here. So we tried to overlap their silhouettes. And the next step was for them to find at least 5 different things that they had in common with their friends. So again, this is just one technique, one kind of idea. There's a million ideas out there about how we can help kids know what they have in common with others. And what I like to do as a teacher was not just to point out like, oh, so-and-so is in our class and They have cerebral palsy and they use a wheelchair, and let's think about how we have things in common with them. I didn't want to just point out a student with an identified disability. Instead, I wanted this to be a whole class discussion, because it's not just connections with kids that have disabilities, but making that sense of community in our classroom. So I always tried to come from the point of view that whatever we do in our class is for everyone, and we don't point out all these special differences for kids that happen to be on IEPs, but that we pointed out differences that we all have, and also how we are alike. So if this is making sense to you, jump in. So Lissa says, my son used to be included in mainstream, but since he entered high school, they haven't let him. He misses that a lot. I bet, Lissa. And it's like incredibly sad when that gets removed from our kids' day at school. For high school kids, sometimes you can find teachers and counselors that are willing to look at the variety of classes that they offer for high school students and say, let's pick, a couple electives this next semester where your son can be included in typical classes. And even if you live in a small community, which I think Lissa does in Idaho, your high school still offers more than just the basic academic classes. So, Lissa, what would be maybe some kinds of elective classes that you think your son might be interested in? So if you want to type that in the comments, and we'll see if we can brainstorm some ways to maybe get that IEP amended so your son doesn't have to miss being included in the mainstream of his school environment. So thanks for being here. That's great. I love when people point out things and make comments, because then we can make the show really pertain to you and your situation and help you. So thank you for doing that. So our first strategy was to make sure that our kids are included more. And we looked at kind of the evolution that inclusion has taken, and hopefully less segregation and exclusion at school. The second way that we can make sure that our kids are connected more is to help them understand that we want them to celebrate those differences that give them part of their identity, but know that that disability label is only one thing, and that they really do have more in common with students that they're with every day. And now, if we want to look at a third way that we can make sure that our kids feel more included in not only the school environment, but also our community, is to look at, I love Venn diagrams and just how those circles connect us, because instead of being separate kind of identities, I like to think about those connecting circles and how they can help us remember that connections are important for our kids. So when we go to IEP meetings, the child should be the focus of the meeting. When we're looking at a topic like today, like how to make sure your child is connected more, your child is going to be the focus. So they're that center of where those overlapping circles are. And probably the closest people to your child are family members and relatives. And even if your relatives are far away, there's probably still a connection, and that, depends on your situation. But when we look at who our child really can depend on right now, and at a basic level, that usually comes from, their immediate family and also extended family with relatives. So one of the things to look at is how we can stay connected. With our acts of kindness that we're doing this month, each day I give you an idea of what your child can do and what you can do as far as random acts of kindness. And I purposely have tried to include ideas that not only are things that your child can do at school to show kindness and to therefore be more connected, but also to show kindness in your family and be more connected with your family. So I think one of the first ideas for our kindness celebration was just to take a pad of sticky notes, and this is like a larger one, and have your child draw a picture or write a message on several of those sticky notes and give that to a family member or a relative. And when they're kind of having a down day, they can pull that off and post it somewhere and remind themselves of the wonderful things that are available in our life and just that little gift from your child. So little things like that make a huge difference. If your relatives are far away, to set up some regular times to talk on the phone or to Skype so people see each other's faces and stay connected that way. All of those things give your child a rich base, and that's really important for everyone to feel that just those basic kinds of needs are met. And that usually comes from our family. So let me see I want to make sure I don't miss any comments. And Lissa says that she hopes he can get to be able to do that again when he comes home. And yes, Lissa, I know that that your son is, not in his neighborhood high school right now. So that could be something that you start planning, though. Usually if you go onto the school's website, they'll have a course catalog of classes that they offer. If they don't, you could contact the high school counselor and say, as we're thinking of having my son, transfer back and transition back to his neighborhood high school, I'd love to be thinking and getting his input about maybe some classes he'd be excited about taking. So, you can start that planning of that transition right now. So that would be fun to do. So if we look at family and relatives being the most important, then we also will expand, and I'm going to see here, if I just showed this one, where it's not only going to be just family and relatives, but it's going to be acquaintances. And to me, there is a difference between real true friendships and acquaintances. So acquaintances can be people in your neighborhood, other kids in the neighborhood that your child recognizes and might say hi and might interact a little bit, but it's not like they're, best friends and really hang out a lot. But those acquaintances, both in the neighborhood and at school, are still really important to help our kids have those connections and know that they belong to a bigger part of things. And acquaintances can also be people at the grocery store. And so if your child goes with you on a short shopping trip, just seeing the same kind of cashiers or things like that at the stores, that sometimes develops into more of an acquaintance relationship. And what helps is this is another person that your child recognizes. It's another person that sees that your child is this neat kid. And yes, they might have a disability, but guess what? They're a consumer. They're going to be shopping. They're going to be buying. They're going to be supporting things in local businesses. And it just gives another kind of window that opens into people in our community being able to see our kids as whole, wonderful, neat kids. So looking at how we can expand beyond just our family, but what kinds of acquaintances can your child develop that later, might turn into those, really true friendships. So then the next level we have is, let's see here. Let me bring this one up. So we still have the child in the center because they're the most important person we're talking about today. We have the family and relatives. We have acquaintances. But now we've also brought in a circle that overlaps with all the other circles. And this is our friends circle. And I don't think it's necessary for ourselves or our kids to have an enormous amount of so-called friends. I think for us as adults, we've learned that sometimes we just have that one or two special friend that is somebody that we can feel comfortable, sharing with, somebody that we love to do an activity with, somebody that, can make us smile when we're feeling kind of down. And that's not just for adults. I mean, kids need those kinds of relationships too. So if our kids are more included at school with typical peers in general ed classes, if our kids are more included with after school clubs or sports teams, park and rec activities, things like that, they have more opportunity to find other kids that, have similar interests that they do want to develop friendships with. So the more opportunities we give, the more possibilities there are for our children to make connections. And that's what we want, not only for ourselves, but for our children. And I think sometimes when I talk to parents of children with disabilities, one of the heartbreaking thing is, my child's in second grade and they've never been invited to a birthday party. And for other people, I think that aren't parents of children with disabilities, might not understand that at all. But as a mom, I do know how important that is for our kids to be accepted, for our kids to know that other people want to be around them. So it may sound like a simple thing to get a birthday party invitation, but that can be a huge thing. Or when your child has a birthday party and they invite other children and not many kids show up, that can be heartbreaking as a parent and as your child. I mean, that's a disappointment, right? So what we want to do today is to change that. We want to open up those opportunities, give your child more possibilities to be connected. And the way they can do that is when they are around other children or students their own age. So that's one of the things that's going to make a huge difference in their life. So if we look at, now we have the child, family, relatives, acquaintances, and we've added friends in there, there's another level of connection that we can look at. And let me pull that one up. And this is when we've added the community. So it's not just about school. It's not just about our neighborhoods. But we also have to look at what the community has to offer. And so when I hear from other parents and they're like, I would love my child to get active in sports, he or she just loves, running and doing things that are really active. What ideas do you have for me? One of the things that I'm going to first suggest is that you always look at what is available if your child did not have a disability. What kind of sports would you be enrolling in them or enrolling them in? What kinds of classes, dance classes or whatever, would you be signing them up for if they didn't have a disability? And that's where I want you to go first. Just like I want you to first look at general ed with supports for your child, I want you to look at typical community park and rec activities, classes that are offered in your community that aren't for those special needs. So what is out there in your community? That's what I want you to tap into first. And yes, a lot of communities have things like Special Olympics or, special dance classes for people with disabilities or a special prom. And as far as my personal value and my professional opinion is, I don't think those special activities are what's going to give our kids the most connection that they need. And my guess is there's going to be some people watching live and watching the replay that will disagree with that. And that's okay, right? We can all kind of weigh in on this, and your circumstances are unique to your child and to your family. However, I really come from a place where I think our kids will shine when they are included in typical activities. And I mean, that I hope continues as your child lives as an adult. For instance, my son Dylan has Down syndrome. He is an adult. He rents a house with a couple roommates. He has support from staff. But when we had a recent meeting, one of the things that Dylan usually does is every Monday he goes to the credit union and uses the ATM machine and withdraws some cash that he can use for his spending money for the week. So he always, has some cash in his wallet and he can make choices about what he spends it on. Well, my husband had this great idea when we were in the meeting, and he was saying, I think it would be neat if instead of using the ATM machine, that Dylan actually walked into the credit union every Monday morning and withdrew his cash for the week. And I thought that's a great idea because now Dylan is getting noticed and he loves being around people. He's real social. And this allows him to have another connection in the community. So simple things like let's do less automation, less drive-through, and more park the car and walk in and get services that way. So that's just something to think about. The reality is we all are always in such a rush and a hurry that it's like, this is so much more convenient to do drive-through things. But when we have our kids with us, it really does make a difference. And I just smile when I think now, those people that pretty much work that same shift on Monday mornings, they're getting to know Dylan as a person. And now they know, there's this guy with Down syndrome and he's got his debit card and his checkbook and he withdraws money and he knows how to count out the money and put it in his wallet and be responsible. And that's pretty cool. I've never known anybody with Down syndrome before. So those little things that we can do on a regular basis, help other people in our communities understand that our kids are wonderful people who contribute to our communities, our neighborhoods, our schools, and need to be accepted and celebrated members for what they can offer others. So I've been kind of jabbering on and on and on here. If you are watching the replay, please know that I will come back and answer questions or, make comments for any kinds of things that you're wondering about. If you'd love to brainstorm some other ideas, you can type in the comment box a few things about your child, and I would be happy to bounce ideas off of you and see how we can help your child be more connected. So if this is something that is of interest to you and it's like, ooh, I got some new ideas here that I'd love to follow up on, please feel free to reach out. Make sure that you like our Visions and Voices Together Facebook page so you'll get notified when we are going live. Basically, every Thursday at noon Mountain Time, we have an edition of our Art of Advocacy show. And each month, I try to have different themes. And this theme, the theme for this month is our Scatter Kindness celebration, but also how that is going to help our kids be more connected. And celebrating who they are and the wonderful things that they offer, and why they need more opportunities to do that. So I hope you have a terrific day, and I hope that you will tune back in. I never introduced myself at the beginning of the video, but I'm Charmaine Tanner. I'm the founder of Collaborative Special Education Advocacy. And as a parent, a retired teacher, I now advocate for students. And I am just passionate about helping other parents like you become more effective advocates for your children. So until next Thursday at noon Mountain Time, go out and make it a wonderful day and take care. Bye-bye.